Hey guys, being a programmer or a web developer or any job at all where you sit all day can do horrible things to your back and your health in general over time. So I would definitely suggest looking into a stand-sit desk. And Anthrodesk has affordable and quality solutions for maximum health and productivity. You can choose from different frame widths depending on your needs. I actually just got one myself and I love it. They also offer accessories like standing converters and floor mats. So check out anthrodesk.com or click the link in the description below. Hey guys, one thing that I can admit that I really slack on in development is testing, and I think that a lot of developers are in this boat. It seems to add work, but in the long run it can really help you out and give you a more efficient way to check things and prevent future errors and issues, stuff like that. So if you're looking at the big picture, it can really lessen your workload, not add to it. Now, I do think that writing unit tests and stuff like that, it's definitely not necessary in all projects, especially really small projects. I do, however, think that all developers, they should put at least some time into learning basic testing practices and technologies, because you most likely will deal with them at some point, especially if you plan on working for a company as opposed to, doing your own thing and freelancing. So what I want to do in this video is just some basic JavaScript unit testing with Jest, which is a great testing solution for JavaScript. It's simple to get up and running, and the basics are very, very easy to learn. I will warn you that this is a beginner tutorial, so if you've done stuff like this in real life, if you've used Jest before, you probably won't learn anything new that you don't already know. But if you haven't worked with testing or Jest, then you should get quite a bit out of this video. It's not going to be the most practical stuff in the world, but it will show you how to get it set up. It will show you how to use some of the matchers. I'll show you how to use it with asynchronous code, stuff like that. Okay, we're also going to look at some of the algorithm solutions from the JavaScript cardio videos that I did, and we're going to create some simple tests for those. I want to do more, and I want to go in depth in the future, so I may do a series on Jest. I also may even do a small course. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in and get started here. So the first thing we want to do is we want to run npm init. I'm going to add the -y flag just to skip the defaults or use the defaults. And this is going to create a package.json file. Now you do need npm, which means you need Node.js installed. So if you don't have that, just go to nodejs.org, download it, and install it. All right, so we'll go ahead and run that, and it creates our package.json, which looks like this. And then we're going to install Jest. So let's say npm I or npm install. I'm going to use -D, which will save it as a dependency. You can also do --save-dev and then Jest. And you can also install Jest globally and run the Jest command directly, but we're just going to install it locally, and we're going to create a script for it. Alright, so now that that's installed, let's create our script. Okay, we already have a test script here, but we just want to change the value to simply Jest and save. And that's it for now. So let's close that up. And now we're going to create a new file. And now I want to create just some basic functions to test. So I'm going to create a file called functions.js. Instead of putting every little function in its own file, we're just going to create basically a collection of functions here. Okay, we also want to create a file called functions.test.js. So it should have the same name as the file, just .test, and Jest will automatically pick that up. So let's go to the functions, and let's create a variable called functions. And then in here, we're going to create our simple functions. Okay, so I'm going to create one called add. This is like the cliche of your first function to test, which is usually a sum or an add function. And I'm going to use arrows here. I'll show you how to do it without arrow functions just in case you're not familiar with ES6. But it's going to take in num1, num2, and then we just want to return num1 plus num2. All right, and if you want to do it without arrow functions, you could simply say function and just pass in here num1, num2, and just return num1 plus num2. Okay, so same exact thing, but I think arrow functions are a shorter, cleaner syntax. So we're going to actually we have to export this so that we can use it in our test file. So we're going to say exports module.exports functions and save. All right, so let's go to functions.test, and we're going to bring that file in, of course, if we want to use it. So functions equals require, and let's do /functions, and we're going to write our first test. Okay, so we simply need to do test, and then we're going to pass in a description, and this can be anything we want. I'm going to say adds 2 plus 2 to equal 4, and then the next parameter will be our function, and I'm going to use an arrow here. So in here we want to say expect, and inside expect is where you put your actual function with any parameters that you want. So since it's in the functions file, we need to do functions dot and then the name of it, which is add, and then we're going to pass in 2 and 2, whoops, 2 and 2, and then we want to add what's called a matcher. Okay, and there's a lot of different matchers in Jest. We're going to use one called 2b. Okay, so basically we're going to say that this function is 2b 4. Okay, this function with these parameters is 2b4. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that, and let's try to run it. So we'll clear this out, and we'll simply say npm test, since we put it in that test script, and Jest should automatically pick it up. And you can see we have test suites, one pass. Now test suite is basically the files. If we have another .test file, that'll be looked at as another suite. But we have one test in here and it passed, and if I scroll up a little bit, you can see right here the file passed, and it shows us that the actual individual test passed as well. Alright, so let's make it fail. Let's go back to our add function, and let's just add on a 1 here. Okay, so obviously now if we pass in 2 and 2, it's not going to equal 4, it's actually going to equal 5. So let's run this test again. We'll say npm test, and it should fail. Okay, so we get 1 failed. Let's go up a little bit here, and it shows us that it failed, and right here it says expected value to be 4 and it received 5. Okay, so that's the reason that it failed. It gives us the reason. Now I'm just going to put this back just so it doesn't fail again. All right, and that's our first test. All right, so very, very simple example, but it shows you how to use Jest. Really, you run the test function, add in a description. Inside your function here, you want to run expect, put in whatever function you're testing, and then whatever your matcher is. In this case, it was 2b. Now we can also use not. So for instance, I'll go ahead and just copy this. And let's change the description. We'll say adds 2 plus 2 to not equal 5. Okay, and then what we could do is right before the matcher we can say .not.2b, and then let's pass in 5. Okay, so this should actually pass because 2 plus 2 should not be 5. And there we go. So we get 2 tests passed. All right, now 2b, it's used to look for a specific value, a specific primitive value, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But we can also test for other things like null, undefined, and then we can check for truthy or falsy values. So in JavaScript, we have something called falsy values, which are things like 0, null, undefined. These are all falsy, so you might want to check just to see if there are any of those, or you might want to check to see if it's actually null or undefined or something. So I'm going to paste these comments in, which just gives you the different matchers that you can use here. So let's go back to our functions file, and I'm just going to create a function called isNull, and we're going to set that to be an arrow, and all we're going to do here is return null. So we'll go back and let's create another test. I'm just going to copy one of these, and we're going to say should be null. Okay, very simple. And then we're going to say functions.isNull. It's not going to take any parameters. And let's get rid of the not. And we want to say instead of 2b, we want to say 2b null. Okay, and we don't want anything passed in there. So if we save this and we go and we run it, that should pass because is null is null. Okay, now if we returned here, let's say undefined and saved and ran our test, you'll see that we get failed, and let's see, expected value to be null, instead it received undefined. Okay, I'm just going to put that back to null so it doesn't fail. Now let's put another method in here, or another function, and let's just call it check value, just to make this simple. And all check value is going to do is going to take in something, and it's simply going to return whatever it is that's passed in. We could have did this in the first place, but whatever, it's fine. So now what I'll do is I'll take this and let's say should be, we'll say should be falsy. Oops, falsy. That's how you spell it, right? And we'll say functions dot, and we called it check value, and we'll just pass in here null. And then I want to use the matcher to be falsy. So let's run that, and what do you guys think is going to happen? It's going to pass because null is a falsy value. If I pass in 0 and save and run, that should pass as well, because that is also falsy. If I pass in undefined and save, that's going to pass. Now if I pass in, let's say 2, and let's run that, that should actually fail because obviously 2 is not a falsy value. If we go up here, it says expected value to be falsy, instead received 2. Okay, but let's just put that back. Now you could also do to be truthy if you wanted it to be truthy. You could even do dot not dot to be falsy, which I guess would be the same as to be truthy. So I don't really know why you would do that, but you could. So that's that. All right, now I want to show you guys something else here. So I'm going to create a function. I'm just going to call it create user, and I'm going to use curly braces here because we're doing more than just returning one thing. We're going to create a variable. Basically what I want this to do is create a user with a first name and a last name of my first name and last name. And we can do it anyway. It doesn't matter how we do it in the function. What matters is what the function gives us. That's what we're testing. So we'll just say const, we'll say const user, and let's set that to first name Brad, and I could just do last name, but let's make it interesting and just take user and add to it last name in this syntax, and we'll say Traversy, or as 99% of you call me, Traversy, and then we just want to return user. All right, so again, it doesn't matter how we created this user. We just want this user to be the return of this function. So let's go back and let's create a test for that. You know what? I'm actually going to put comments in here. So this is like to be falsy. This is to be null. To be, and I'm not even going to get near all of the different matchers. You guys can check the documentation out if you want to do that. This is not. All right, so let's try this. We'll say user should be Brad Traversy object. Okay, and then we want to call create user, and we don't need to pass anything in. And let's do to be, and then let's pass in the object with a first name of Brad and last name of Traversy, and save. Now the reason it formats on save is because I'm using the prettier extension and I have it set to do that. But let's run this and see what happens. And what do you guys think is going to happen? Is it going to pass? Is it not? I mean, it is returning an object with the first name and last name of Brad Traversy, and it failed. So if we scroll up here, it actually gives us a pretty good excuse, or not excuse, reason why it failed. It says compared values have no visual difference, which is true. Looks like you wanted to test for an object or an array equality with the strict to-be matcher. Okay, we use the to-be matcher. You probably need to use to-equal instead. So basically to-be is for basically primitive types. So like for is to be for a string, which is a number. A string is to be a string. But an object or an array is actually a reference type in JavaScript. So they're actually you can have two of the same looking objects, but they're actually stored in different memory areas in the system if you really get into it. So they're treated differently, and to-be is not going to work on an object. So if you want to use an object or an array or something like that, then you want to use to-equal instead. All right, so let's try it with to-equal. We'll go ahead and run npm test. And now it passes. Okay, that's fine, because it's an object, and to-equal will actually compare objects and arrays and stuff like that. So keep that in mind. And I'll just put a comment here that says to-equal. All right, now just to touch on some other matchers that are available, we have like less than and greater than. So to give you an example, we'll say test, let's say should be under 1600. Let's say maybe it's like an application that deals with weight or something like that, and a shipment has to be under a certain amount. And let's go ahead and put in our function here. And I'm not even going to create a function inside the functions file. We can actually put our logic right in here. So we'll say load1 equals 800, and we'll say load2 equals 700, and then we'll say expect load1 plus load2, and then let's do dot to be less than 1600. Okay, so the logic, I mean, it can be in another file, it can be a function in this file, it can be in the actual test itself. It's very flexible. But let's run this and see if that passes. Okay, so it does. If I change this to 800, which is actually 1600, this should actually fail. Okay, because it's to be less than. But we also have to be less than or equal, which that should pass. And there we go, so that passes. All right, let's see. We also can test regular expressions. So if we say test, and I'm going to use one from the documentation, we'll say there is no I in team, and we'll put a function here, and we want to expect, we're just going to pass in a string. Okay, so team, it doesn't have to be a function, you can pass in anything here. And I'm going to say dot not, and then we're going to use to match, which does just that. It matches a regular expression. The regular expression we're going to put in here is I. Okay, so it should not, there should not be an I in team. So we'll run this, and it passes. Okay, if I put an I in team, it fails. Now if I put a lowercase I, it passes. And the reason for that is if you know about regular expressions, then you know if we just do, this is basically just a literal capital or uppercase I, and it's not case sensitive. If we want it to be case insensitive, then we want to put an I here. So if we go ahead and save that and run this, that should fail because it has an I. Whether it's lowercase or uppercase, it should fail. Okay, so that's regular expressions. Also, if we want to work with arrays, let's do a test let's say admin should be in username. So basically what I'm going to do here is I'm going to have an array of usernames, and we'll have some names. So we'll have, let's say, John, we'll say Karen, and admin. All right, so maybe you have, you know, a database of names, and an admin should be one of them. So what we can do is we can say expect usernames, and then for arrays we can use a matcher called toContain, and in here let's say admin. Okay, we'll go ahead and run that, and we get that passed. Good. If we take admin out of this array, run our test. Okay, so that failed, and up here expected array, and then toContain value admin. So it does a pretty good job of describing what exactly is wrong. All right, so now what I want to do, these are pretty basic. And, you know, this whole tutorial is kind of basic, but I want you guys just to get the hang of it. And like I said, maybe later on we can do a course or a series that's more in depth where we integrate it into an actual project. But what I want to do now is work with asynchronous data, because there's a couple things that you need to know. So I'm actually going to install axios. I'm going to say npm I axios, which is just a HTTP client. We could use fetch, but axios is a little easier. And then we're going to go back to our functions.js, and let's create a function here called fetch user. And what I'm going to do here, actually I don't even need that. Let's say axios.get, and I'm going to make a GET request to the JSON placeholder API. So if you guys don't know what that is, it's basically a fake REST API for testing. You can make requests to, you can get all these different resources, for instance, users. If you make a request to this URL, you'll get a list of 100 users. I only want one, so we can actually put the ID. So I'm going to use the first one. So I'm going to say /1, which gives us this Leanne Graham. And what I want to do is write a test to test to see if the request that we get back from this URL, if the name is equal to Leanne Graham. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and let's do our request. We'll pass in that URL. And let's see, we want to, since we're using axios, it's going to return a promise, so we'll do .then, and let's just take our response, and we'll return the res.data, which will give us the JSON data. And if there's an error, so we'll say .catch, let's go ahead and let's just return a string of error. All right, so that's something that you would have in your application. You're just making a request to an API and you're getting the data. So let's go into our test file, and let's put a comment in here. We'll say working with async data. Okay, so let's create a test, and let's say user fetched name should be, how do we spell this? Leanne Graham. Okay, so when we're dealing with asynchronous data, we actually need to add in here expect dot assertions, and then the number of assertions we expect, which is 1. Now expected assertions, it verifies that a certain number of assertions are called, which in this case is 1, and this is used when testing asynchronous code in order to make sure that the assertions in a callback, or in this case a .then of a promise, actually get called. And I believe if we leave this out and the name doesn't match, the test will still pass, and we can see if that's true or not. But let's go ahead and keep going here. Another thing you want to do is you want to return the promise. Okay, If you omit this return statement, then the test will basically complete before the fetch completes, or in this case, our axios get. So let's say return functions dot, and we called it what? Fetch user, right? So fetch user, and it's going to give us a promise. So we want to do dot then. Go ahead and put this on a separate line. And inside the dot then, we'll get our data, and we're going to set an arrow function here. And let's say expect, this is where we want to put our test, data. Now remember, it's an object. We want to test the name. So data.name, and we want to do 2 equal, and then we want it to equal Leanne Graham, and I hope I spelled that right. Okay, so yeah, so that should do it. Let's save it, and let's go ahead and run it. So we'll run npm test. Okay, so we got failed. Let's see what happened here. Axios is not defined. I didn't bring in axios. So we got to go back to our functions and just simply bring that in. All right, let's try it again. All right, so it passed. Good. User fetch name. So now what I want to do is actually comment out the assertion statement here, or assertions function, and let's try it again. Well, actually, hold on a second. I wanted to actually change the name. So 2 equal, let's say Leanne Graham 1. Now that should not pass because that's not the name that's returned. Okay, so actually it did still work. I thought it wouldn't. Or maybe it was if we don't return it, then it will still pass. Let's try that. So if we leave out the return and run npm test, no, that's still, user fetch name should be Leanne Graham. But we get this expected 1 assertion to be called, but receives 0 assertion calls. So we're getting a different message here. It failed, but it's basically saying we didn't get any assertion calls. All right. Now, if we have both of these removed, the return and the assertions, that's when it passes. That's what it was. I knew it was some combination of this. Yeah. So see, it's passing. If we don't return and use expect assertions, then it's going to pass no matter what this name is. So make sure that you have both of those when you're dealing with asynchronous data like this. All right, now if we wanted to refactor this as an async await, we could do that. So let's just say promise, and then I'll just grab this. All right, so to refactor this, what we'll do is we'll mark this as async, as an async function. We want to leave the expect assertions, and then what we can do is, instead of doing the dot then and all that, I'm going to actually get rid of that, and we're going to say const data equals await, and then the function, the asynchronous function, and then we can just do expect data.name to equal Leanne Graham. Okay, so that's the async await syntax. So what I'm going to do is just comment out the promise, and let's go ahead and try that. And there we go. So that passes as well. All right, so that's going to be it for this file, guys, and these little functions here. Now what I want to do is I want to grab some of the solutions from the algorithms that we did in JavaScript cardio. I had 2 videos, 2 sessions where we just did some different algorithms, and I want to test some of those. So first one we're going to look at is, this is my GitHub here. I'm going to go to index finished, and I want to do this reverse string. So you can see there's a lot of different solutions here. I even had people do pull requests, and other people added solutions and so on. And if you want to check those videos out, I did them pretty recently, probably about within a month or two ago. But I'm just going to grab, let's see, so let's grab this solution here to reverse a string. So I'm going to create a new file for this, and I'm going to call it reverse string.js. And then, of course, we want to create another file called reverse string.test.js. All right, so inside our reverse string, I'll actually type it out. It's easy enough. Let's use an arrow function here. So I'll say reverse string, and we want a string passed in. And actually, we don't even need curly braces here. We're just going to take the string that's passed in. Let's put this on a new line, and we're going to call dot split. Okay, so this was the answer to the algorithm, or to the problem here. We want to split it into an array. So each letter of the string, or each, I should say, each character will be split, and then we want to reverse it, because we can call dot reverse on an array like that. And then we want to join it back to a string. Okay, join will bring it back to a string, and that should do it. All right, so let's go module dot exports equals reverse string, and let's save, and then let's go into our test file. So reverse string, oh shit, we are in our test file. Let's actually cut that out and put that in our regular JS file. And then we'll go back to our test file, and let's bring that in. So we'll say const reverse string equals require, and we want to bring in reverse string. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to test to see if that function exists. Okay, and we haven't done this yet. We'll just say reverse string function exists. Okay, and this is very simple. We're just going to say expect reverse string, and then we want to use the matcher of to be defined. Okay, we just want to see if it's defined. That's it. So that'll be our first test. Our next test, we're going to see if the string reverses. So we'll say expect reverse string, and let's pass in hello, string hello, and let's do dot to equal, and we want that to equal hello backwards, which of course is going to be O-L-L-E-H. All right, so let's save that, and let's go ahead and let's go down here and run npm test. And what it's going to do is it's going to test both test suites, or both files. Okay, so 2 test suites passed, 11 tests passed. If we go up here, you'll see, where is it? So that's functions. Oh, you know what? It's actually not going to show us each individual test, I guess, since we have more than one suite. But you can see that the reverse string test suite passed. Okay, so that means all the tests passed. Now, what if we were to test this and have this first hello be an uppercase H? Let's try that. We'll say string reverses with uppercase. And we'll go ahead and run that. And we get a failed test. So if we go up here, expected value was this, but it received this. So we can easily refactor this to make that test pass by simply taking the string, and before we do anything, we'll just set everything to lowercase. So we'll say to lowercase. Okay? So if we do that, the test should now pass. And there we go. So it passes. Because what happens was when we passed in this hello, even though it has an uppercase, that it all gets turned to lowercase here before it splits into an array, reverses, and then joins back into a string. All right, so that's that. Let's do another one. Let's try the chunk. Let me just show you real quick what that is, the array chunk. I think it was session 2, actually. Yeah, it was. So let's go back to session 2. Right here, array chunking. And basically what happens is we want to be able to pass in an array and then a number, a length. And we want to split this up into chunks of this length. So if we passed in 1 through 7, we would want to get this back. So chunks of 3. So 1, 2, 3 would be one chunk, 4, 5, 6 another, and then whatever's left over would be put into the next chunk. Okay, even if it wasn't 3, it would still be put into the next chunk, and so on. All right, so what I'm going to do here is grab solution 2, and if you guys are interested in these algorithms and solving them and stuff, check out the JavaScript cardio. I'll actually link a link to the videos in the description, but I'm going to grab this here. So this is just a solution. It's not the actual function call, so we'll have to add that in the file. But I'm going to copy this, and let's create a new file. We'll call it chunk.js. Whoops, I didn't want that in there, that L. And then let's create chunk.test.js. Okay, and inside chunk, we're going to say const, let's call it chunk array, and it's going to take in two things. It's going to take in the array and the length, and then I'm going to paste in what I copied, which is our solution, and then we're just going to export it. Okay, so let's go to our test file. And we want to bring it in, of course, so we'll say const chunk array equals require, and we want our chunk file. Okay, so let's do test, and we'll just test to see if it exists. We can grab that from the reverse string test. So this right here, this first one. And we'll just put that in, and we'll check for chunk array. Let's change the description. Okay, so now let's do a test case. So we'll do test, and let's say chunk an array of 10 values with the length, with a length of 2. All right, so let's create an array. They're just arrays of numbers, so I'll call it numbers. And let's create that array. So 1, 2, 3. So 1 through 10. Save that to break those up. Gotta love the prettier extension. It does stuff like that. I didn't have to. It put those spaces in for me. All right, then we'll do a variable called length, and we'll set it to 2 because that's what we're testing. We're testing an array of 10 values, which we have here, and then a length of 2. And then we're going to say expect, and we're going to call chunk. Actually, you know what? We want to create a variable called chunked. I'll say chunked ARR, and then this is where we're going to call the function. Okay, so we'll say chunk array, and then we'll pass in the numbers array, and we'll pass in the length. Okay, so that'll put the return value in here, and that's what we can test. So we'll go chunked R, and what should this be equal to? So we're going to say .to equal, and it should be equal to an array of chunks. So we're going to put brackets, another set of brackets, which should be 1 and 2, okay, because they're two length chunks. So the next one should be 3, 4. The next one should be 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, 10. So that's what it should equal if our function is correct. If our solution, all this stuff is correct, then this should pass. All right, so let's actually save it and let's try it out. All right, so it looks like everything passed. Good. If I were to, let's see, mess this function up somehow, you know what we'll do is we'll just mess this up by changing this to a 2. And let's run that. All right, so we get a failed test, and it's just going to show us the difference here. So what's expected and what's received. So it's expected to equal this, but it actually got this because we put the wrong thing in here. Okay, we put a 2 and the solution would be 1. Okay, so if you wanted to test a couple other cases, what we could do is we could copy this and we could kind of change it up. We could say like an array of 3 values with the length of 1. So if we had 3 values in our array, 1, 2, 3, and we had a length of 1, and we just pass that in here, what it should equal is basically 1 chunk arrays. So 1, 2, and 3. All right, so let's see if that passes. And it does. Okay. So we're going to do one more here. We're going to do the anagrams. So basically, let's go back to our GitHub here. Anagrams is, where is it? Is it in this session right here? So an anagram is basically two words or whatever strings that have the same characters. So an example would be elbow equals below. It has the same characters. Now our solution here, what we did is we made it so that it doesn't matter if there's an uppercase, that shouldn't matter. It doesn't matter if there's any spaces. It also doesn't matter if there's any characters like number signs or exclamations, anything like that, special characters. So this would actually match. Dormitory and dirty room would match because it has the same, basically the same letters. All right, so what we'll do is we'll take this solution, which it's composed of a helper function, this format string, and then we just call it, we compared format string passed in the first one to format string passed in the second string. All right, so we're just going to grab this whole thing here and copy it, and let's go back and let's create a file called anagram.js, and let's create anagram.test.js. Okay, and inside anagram.js, we're going to paste this in, and we're just going to module.exports equals, and we want to make sure we export is anagram. That's the main function here. This is just a helper function. And again, if you're interested in what this does or any of these algorithms, go ahead and watch those cardio sessions. So in our test file, so let's bring in is anagram. All right, now what we did in the last two files is we used to be defined. I'm going to show you something else we can do here to test to see if this is an actual, if it's a function. So let's say is anagram function exists. So we can say expect and we're going to say type of. Now type of, we'll check to see what this is. So we want to say if type of is anagram, and then let's do dot to equal, and then we can pass in here a string of function. Okay, so we can do that as well to make sure that it's an actual function. All right, so let's try an anagram here. We'll say actually, I'll just copy this. Let's say an example would be cinema. So we'll say cinema is an anagram of Iceman. Okay, because they have the same characters. So in here we want to say expect. Let's call is anagram, and let's pass in two strings. One is going to be cinema. One is going to be Iceman. And we want to, what we want this to be is truthy. So we're going to say to be truthy. Okay, we don't have to pass in anything here. And that should pass. That should be an anagram. So let's copy this and let's create another one. So let's try the example that was in the GitHub. We'll say dormitory. And then remember, it shouldn't matter if it has an uppercase. It shouldn't matter if it has special characters or spaces. So it should match dirty space room, and then we'll put in a couple number signs. And then of course we want to pass those in here. Okay. Now let's do one that shouldn't be an anagram. So we'll copy this and let's try hello. We'll say is not an anagram of aloha. So we'll pass in hello and aloha, and this should be falsy. Okay, so that should pass because we're using to be falsy. So let's save this and let's run our npm test. And there we go, all of our tests have passed. Awesome. All right, so hopefully this gave you guys a good idea of how testing works at a basic level at least. What I want to do now before I go is I'm going to go back to my functions.test file. Now there may be cases where you want to run something before or after a test, or before or after all your tests, and we can actually, there's actually I don't even know what these are really called. They're kind of like life cycle methods, I guess. But they're functions that will run just then, before each test or after each test. So I want to show you guys how to use those. So let's first create a couple just dummy functions to run. So let's say that we wanted to initialize a database before each function and then clear it after each function. So we'll create a function called init database, and let's just console.log, and we'll say init, or let's say database initialized. All right, and then I'll just copy that down, and let's say database closed, and we'll change this to closed database. All right, so we have these two functions. Now let's say we want to run these before and after each test in this file. So what we would do is we would say before each, and inside here we'll put in a function. I'm going to use an arrow function, and let's say init database. Okay, and then I'm going to say after each, then we want to call close database. And of course you don't have to use arrow functions if you don't want. So let's see, let's save this and let's run our tests. All right, and if we go up here, look at all that. So we get the database initialized and database closed. It ran, init database ran before every test in this file, and then the closed database ran after everyone. All right, now what if we want to just run it before all of the tests, and then once all the tests complete, we want to run closed database? So what we would do then, let's actually copy this and comment it out. But what we would do then is we would use before all and after all. Okay, so we'll say before all, after all. And we'll run this again, npm test. And let's go up here, and you can see that each one only ran once. All right, let me just, I can't really get to it, but you can see that it only ran twice. Okay, database initialized, database closed, and that's it, because it only ran once before this, all the tests started, and then after they started. Now you can also target certain tests if you want to run something just for certain ones, instead of having it be all or you know, before and after all, or before and after each one. If you wanted to target them, what we could do is we could use describe. So I'm going to comment this stuff out, and let's go down here and let's say describe, and let's see, we'll create a couple simple tests here that will check names. So we'll say describe checking names, and then we want to put a function, and then in here is where we want to put our before each. Let's just do before each, and what I want to run here is a function called name check, like that. Okay, and then inside this describe, or I'm sorry, not inside the describe, outside of the describe, we're going to create that function name check. And then all it's going to do is console.log checking name. Obviously your real code is going to be much more advanced, but this just gives you an idea of how to use Jest. So before each, check names inside the describe, and then we'll have our tests in here. So let's say test, and we'll say user is Jeff. Okay, very simple test. We'll just say expect user, actually let's create a variable called user and set it to Jeff. So expect user dot, and we can use to be here, it's just a string, to be Jeff. Okay, and then I'm just going to copy that very simple test, and here we'll say user is Karen, and we'll change this and this to Karen. Alright, so now let's save this, and it should run this name check function only before these two tests, since they're inside this describe block. So let's run this, and if we go up here, you'll see checking name only ran twice because we have these two tests here. Alright, so hopefully that makes sense. If you need to, and whatever, initialize a database, whatever it may be, any kind of functionality that you want to run before a test or before all tests or a certain group of tests, you can do that with these before each, before all, and describe. And this stuff is all in the documentation, guys. If you want to get deeper into it, at this time I would suggest using the documentation. It's really clear. I actually really like it. Now there's one more thing that I wanted to show you guys, and that is the watch all flag. You can actually have your tests run as you're developing. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the package.json file, and I'm going to add an additional script here. You could add it to just your regular test script if you want, but I'm just going to add a new one called, we'll call it test watch. And then we're going to set this to Jest, and we're going to add the flag -- watch all, like that. All right, and then down here, I'm going to go ahead and run npm run test watch. All right, so it's going to go through, it's going to run our tests. I believe, yes, it runs it right off the bat. But now you can see that it's actually watching, and you can press F to run only failed tests, or O to run tests related to changed files, and so on. But if we leave it as is and we go and we change something like, we'll go to reverse string, and let's remove the 2 lowercase. Now remember, we had a test actually testing to see if we had an uppercase, if it would reverse and it would still match the lowercase. So let's go ahead and save that, and you can see automatically the test just ran. I didn't have to do npm test. It's just going to continuously watch, and we had a fail, and it's this right here. It's this test, string reverses with uppercase. If I put that back and I go ahead and save, it'll go ahead and run again, and you can see that it now passes. All right, so I just wanted to make sure I showed you that, because that's a pretty important part of Jest is the watch mode. All right, guys, that's going to be it for this crash course. Sorry if it was a little long. I just wanted to kind of, give you a bunch of different scenarios. And I know it's not the same as, testing for an actual project, but I wanted to do something from scratch for people that have never dealt with this kind of thing before, rather than saying, all right, here's a project, let's add some tests. Even though you've never worked with this project or seen it before or know what it does or anything, I think this kind of just explained the basics a little better than doing something like that. But again, I do want to do something more in depth in the future. All right, so please leave a like if you like this video. Please subscribe if you're not and you like this kind of content. And that's it. I will see you next time. Hey guys, being a programmer or a web developer or any job at all where you sit all day can do horrible things to your back and your health in general over time. So I would definitely suggest looking into a stand-sit desk. And Anthrodesk has affordable and quality solutions for maximum health and productivity. You can choose from different frame widths depending on your needs. I actually just got one myself and I love it. They also offer accessories like standing converters and floor mats. So check out anthrodesk.com or click the link in the description below.